has written what I regard one of the best articles. Stephen Basser, a GP, and who has for many years strongly held very careful views about alternative medicine. He wrote what I think is the definitive review of acupuncture. Barry Williams tells me that Stephen's article on acupuncture in the Skeptic is the most requested article we have. So I'm really looking forward to hear what Stephen's got to say today. I haven't heard from him for a while. He's been concentrating on family and work for a few years, but it's lovely to see him back. So Stephen, welcome back to the stage.
Yes, thank you very much. Nice to be back in the belly of the beast. My wife and I were just reflecting on the passage of time, which I think is something that you do when you have a satanic teenager with motivational deficiency disorder. And we were reflecting on a picture that we have at home of Susan Blackmore, who came out many years ago, and we have a photo of Sue playing. We gave her a lift and she popped into our house for a short period, and we have a photo of her playing on the ground with the then non-satanic child, and we were just reflecting how time goes by. And after all this time, it's lovely to see that there's still such a fantastic turnout, great venue, and that skepticism is still alive and well. Okay, so I'd like to start by asking a question. And that is, why do we regulate therapeutic goods? Are there any ideas in the audience as to why do we regulate therapeutic goods? Just Thank you. So why is it that we concern ourselves with trying to establish a balance between risk and benefit? My position is, if we ask a random selection of people, even skeptics, that one of the most common responses that you're going to get is that we regulate therapeutic goods in the interest of public protection, that we are interested in people's welfare. A worthy, kind, fuzzy sentiment, but we're at a skeptics conference, so we have to do a little bit better than that. I'd like to propose that one of the most important reasons for stringent regulation is one of the least likely that people are going to publicly acknowledge, and that is self-interest. The regulation of therapeutic goods is predicated upon one of the major underpinnings of modern economic theory, and that is the belief that humans are fundamentally driven by self-interest. If, as scientific skeptics, we have any holy grails, one of them is surely objectivity. And to scientists, the danger of self-interest is that it has the capacity to impair objectivity. If I'm profiting from a particular venture or a particular activity, whether that profit be financial, academic, personal prestige, political, then I may be less likely to acknowledge that what I'm doing has limited merit or validity or value. And I may be particularly blinded to the possibility that what I'm doing could in fact be causing active harm. Car companies have not generally been the first to provide scientific advice on the need to limit exhaust emissions. Oil company scientists were not lining up to warn us about the potential dangers of global warming. Therapeutic goods regulation is in place and is needed because basically we believe pharmaceutical companies are not likely to be good judges of the efficacy and relative safety of the products that they are going to profit from. We believe that left to be judges of their own products, pharmaceutical companies will devote far less time and money to establishing that their products can actually do what is claimed, and to establishing that the benefit is achieved with a low enough risk profile to justify putting the public at risk. We believe that pharmaceutical companies will choose not to draw attention to unsupportive research, and that if a drug appears to be causing problems, we believe that their first response is going to be to defend it and to defend themselves. We believe that given the chance, pharmaceutical companies will bend the truth in their advertising so as to maximise financial gain. Basically, we don't trust pharmaceutical companies. We don't trust them to put our welfare before their own welfare. We believe all of this about the companies that produce prescription pharmaceuticals, and we have in place a system that at least attempts to account for self-interest by requiring evidence regarding efficacy and safety be submitted and reviewed by an independent body before a drug can be released. We also have in place in Australia a system of post-marketing surveillance that is designed to hopefully pick up toxic effects that may not have been apparent in the initial phase when the drug was developed. Now, what astounds me and continues to anger me is that under the existing legislation in Australia, we appear to not believe that any of this applies to the companies that are responsible for producing, promoting and profiting from the range of alternative or complementary therapies. Just a little recap. In Australia, just to simplify things, therapeutic goods are legislated, and therapeutic goods are essentially divided into two categories. We have what are called registered goods, which includes most of the prescription pharmaceuticals. And registered goods must be assessed with regards to efficacy and safety. As I mentioned earlier, the drug company puts a submission in to an independent body and presents information that, hopefully for them, establishes that the drug can actually do what they are claiming that it does, and that it does so without poisoning too many people. Now, the second main classification is listed goods. And listed goods, there is no requirement for them to establish efficacy. There is something about safety, so there has to be quality control, they have to be produced in a clean manner, but nothing with regards to efficacy. Thus, there remains in Australia to this day a classification of therapeutic goods in which there is no requirement for the substances or devices to actually establish that they are able to do what is claimed before they are released onto the market. And in the words of the late great Julius Sumner Miller, why is it so? Why should the products used by alternative practitioners not fully satisfy the same requirements of efficacy, relative safety and quality control as those that we demand of pharmaceutical agents? Why is it that we assume that self-interest will blind the objectivity of the companies that produce prescription drugs, but the companies that produce homeopathics, herbals and naturopathic cures are all kindly altruists who couldn't possibly be motivated by the same drives? We have, in essence, the little devil, the evil pharmaceutical companies producing prescription drugs that we have to control, and the perfect angels, the kindly homeopathic natural cures. Fortunately, I'm not alone in asking for an overhaul of the regulation of therapeutic goods, and I did not know Loretta was going to be here today, I promise. This piece recently appeared in a weekly medical newspaper that is sent primarily out to GPs like myself. And this piece drew attention to Australia's flawed therapeutic goods regulation. And I'd like to draw attention to a particular point that it makes. Current regulations allow the TGA to list therapeutics, this is the listed goods, despite limited evidence for their efficacy, because they are deemed low risk and, this is the part I'd like to emphasise, only carry claims for health maintenance for non-serious self-limiting conditions. As the motto down in the corner says, let's seek a little bit of evidence. This next slide shows 3 products that were advertised in the May-June edition of the Journal of Complementary Medicine, a relatively new bi-monthly Australian publication that is also sent regularly out to GPs. So let's start on the left-hand side. Now that I am officially a middle-aged skeptic, perhaps I should consider some Cosamin DS for my osteoarthritis. After all, as you can see, it is evidence-based, as is, on the upper right-hand side, Cardiotone, which seems to offer me a little bit more bang for my buck, as not only is it a cardiovascular tonic, but is also a member of the anti-aging family of medications. I did wonder whether or not this actually does satisfy as a claim merely for health maintenance. Perhaps if I don't age, I might maintain my current health. And then, of course, there's lactoferrin, which quite frankly I'm surprised is not in our drinking water, or at least I hope that it's going to be served at lunch today. Antiviral, anti-inflammatory, antimicrobial, antibacterial and antifungal, and ideal for such non-serious self-limiting conditions as lupus erythematosus and rheumatoid arthritis. This advertisement for Lipronol, which is a modern version of the green-lipped mussel extract, which many of you may remember was one of the arthritis cures many, many years ago. This advertisement appeared in the same edition. Very scientific looking. It's got a flow chart, it's got a graph, and of course it makes use of that wonderfully ubiquitous term, clinically proven. So what sort of response do we expect when someone like me, or someone like Loretta, raises this issue and calls for a bit of consistency in therapeutic goods regulation? Well, of course, it is opposed vehemently by those who are protecting their self-interest. The most vocal opponents of calls to change the existing system, not unsurprisingly, are those who are profiting from the low level of regulation and have a significant amount to lose if the situation is going to be altered. They will fight to protect their products, even if it means ignoring evidence that questions the value or safety of their products. This same edition of the Journal of Complementary Medicine in fact contained an excellent review of the use of complementary medicines in cancer care. I'm surprised they published it, because in fact it concluded that most of them had no scientific evidence behind them. But from that article came this following very interesting acknowledgement. The typical reaction of the alternative cancer medicine community to negative results has been to take these merely as proof of the bias of conventional researchers. One of the hallmarks of good science is to make explicit the weakness of your position. This is not generally the response seen from the alternative medicine industry when faced with calls for tighter regulation. If profits are being made from products that are truly effective, then presumably the existence of sound, objective, scientific evidence will only serve to bolster the product and therefore to increase profits. You noticed in the advertisements, the companies are quite happy to refer to scientific evidence, clinically proven, when advertising their products. But if we suggest that they present that evidence to the Pharmaceutical Benefits Advisory Committee, not so keen. If profits are currently being made from products that are ineffective or maybe more toxic than is acceptable, then what is driving the resistance to having these products identified and either removed from the system or their use limited? The flaws in our therapeutic goods legislation have enabled the vast majority of unproven alternative products to proliferate essentially isolated from proper scientific scrutiny. The companies and individuals behind these products have a clear motivation to resist efforts to change the status quo. And most understand that crucial to the success of this ongoing resistance is the ability to exert influence through three principal non-scientific areas: educational institutions, the political arena, and the media. Many educational institutions are now profit-driven, so new means of getting students, or paying customers as they are for many educational institutions nowadays, new means of getting students enrolled are likely to be embraced, such as graduate certificate, diploma or a master's of nutrition medicine through RMIT University, the Australian College of Holistic Medicine. As for politicians, well, I'm not sure that the word objective is really in the political dictionary. If I can get elected by promising my constituents crystal healing and coffee enemas, then so be it. Which leaves us with the media. David's presentation clearly showed us that the media does not naturally embrace accuracy and scientific objectivity. The media would much rather create controversy, have a story. And the ever-shrinking news cycle also means that it's much more difficult for even a motivated journalist to do a proper fact check. 24-hour news channels, a story's there and then it's gone, a blink of the eye. To borrow from the Media Doctor website, advocates for treatments use the media to create pressure from the community. Or this, from another advertisement in the Journal of Complementary Medicine. As more and more people learn about natural health products and therapies, chiefly through the media. Now, I wanted to just perhaps illustrate this a little better using the example of the human papillomavirus vaccine, the vaccine against cervical cancer, which many of you may have read about, marketed in Australia as under the name Gardasil. An application to have Gardasil funded through the Pharmaceutical Benefits Scheme was recently considered by the Pharmaceutical Benefits Advisory Committee, the body whose job it is to assess the information, balancing risk, benefit and cost, so that you and I, the taxpayer, don't end up paying too much for a product that is put on the PBS, or that we don't end up paying for a product that is either ineffective or toxic. the Pharmaceutical Benefits Advisory Committee declined to fund Gardasil based upon two primary issues. First, the price that the drug company CSL was asking, and secondly, they expressed some doubt over the long-term efficacy. Now, this also was probably a cost issue, because the point they were making was that if the immunity was not long-lasting, then the women who were given the vaccine might subsequently need a booster, and they were obviously looking at the subsequent cost of those boosters. So let's just look at how this news was reported. Firstly, in the Age newspaper. This was just a little sidebar. It was on the front page, but it was a little sidebar. And I would say this seems to accurately reflect the situation. This accurately reflects the Pharmaceutical Benefits Advisory Committee's reasoning that basically it was too costly. Now let's look at the companion newspaper in Melbourne, the Herald Sun. Super drug snub. Judge and jury. The Herald Sun has obviously decided that their scientific analysis is that this was a super drug, and that the decision to reject it was totally unreasonable. Finally, let's look at how the same story was reported in Australian Doctor, the medical newspaper that is distributed to GPs that I was mentioning earlier. And this is interesting because their main line was to concentrate on the rotavirus vaccine, which David also mentioned in the last presentation. And the basis of this story is that lost in the outrage that occurred and was generated by papers such as the Herald Sun, lost in the outrage over the decision to reject the application for Gardasil, was the fact that the Pharmaceutical Benefits Advisory Committee did in fact approve the rotavirus vaccine. Two vaccines, there are actually two vaccines, which protect infants from rotavirus, one of the commonest causes of gastroenteritis. Now, what was also lost, what was reported in this piece but was not reported in either the Age or the Herald Sun, was that the rotavirus vaccine had in fact originally been rejected in July on similar grounds, because the price that the company was asking for it was considered to be too much. So the drug company went away, reconsidered its position, realised that there was still a benefit in it being on the pharmaceutical benefits scheme, being a part of the approved immunisation schedule, and resubmitted. And we can expect that the same will happen with Gardasil. Interestingly, the Sydney Morning Herald, just again to identify issues with the way that the media sometimes report these stories, the Sydney Morning Herald did give mention to the approval for the rotavirus, but the headline was something along the lines of further jab for children or something, and I wish the journalist that did the story had realised that the rotavirus is in fact an oral vaccine. Modern medicine was founded upon scientific principles, and its ongoing development is dependent, I believe, upon adhering to these principles and adhering to the methods of inquiry that they teach us. This means, I believe, that we continue to demand immediate reform of therapeutic goods legislation in Australia to ensure that all therapies, however they are referred to, are held to these very same principles. Science is not a popularity contest, and we cannot countenance watering down of these principles just because it might prove to be unpopular. This is not Australian Drugs Idol or Dancing with the Drugs, where the viewers get to SMS their favourite selection. Ironically enough, in closing, I would like to turn to the media and borrow some words uttered by actor Gary Sinise in a recent episode of CSI New York. My motivational deficiency disorder is leading me to spend too much time on the couch. CSI New York is one of those very fashionable forensic programs where the crime is solved in an hour, very realistic. But I was watching this program and there was a situation in which one of the workers in the laboratory had made some sort of an error of judgment that challenged the case. And the Gary Sinise character turned to him and spoke these words, which I believe could almost be an alternative motto for the skeptics. Science is our integrity. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stephen. We've got time for some questions. Peter. Wait for the microphone, Peter. It's running across to you in the feed.
I'm speaking from memory, so if this question is repeated in a report, I'll be grateful to be checked back. Not that I'm trying to spin anything, but that's I'm working from memory, and there may be the odd thing out. Stephen, partway through your listing at the end, you drew attention to nutrition and so-called nutrition medicine and qualifications in there. It seems to me that this is one of the most pervasive areas in which there is extreme uncertainty, in which science and medical research are often being either misreported or the basis for the benefits that are claimed for various nutrition, diets and so on health are being overstated. At the bottom of my pile of papers, which I couldn't get to at the end of my talk yesterday, was going to be drawing attention to the CSIRO's claims for their, quote, CSIRO diet, published in their book, a second edition of which was launched by the Minister, not by CSIRO, it was launched by the Minister just a short time ago. Their claims on the front page, on the cover of the CSIRO diet, unchanged in the second edition, say scientifically proven. Now, the basis for that within the book itself was a single study of 100 obese women, 24 of whom did not complete the procedure. And it was therefore expanded into being widely applicable to the whole of the population. That was the scientific evidence which was quoted. I believe that scientific evidence is not in volume 2, although I flipped through it, I couldn't find it. And this was taken to task by the journal Nature on the publication of the book in January this year, and it's on the record, a very strong critique of the claims being made by supposedly Australia's premier scientific organisation that scientifically proven could be related to such a limited amount of data. Basically, the CSIRO diet book has now morphed into a recipe book, but it still has those claims, and I'd be appreciative of any comments you have to make in general or in particular, not necessarily on that particular case, but on the effect of nutrition medicine as an example of your general point.
Thank you. There's a number of issues there. I think that it draws back to, again, a couple of things that were mentioned by David in the last presentation. There's the issue of marginal gain. There's the issue of, by altering something, that you may achieve some sort of a measurable benefit, but the benefit is so marginal that really doesn't have an impact in an overall sense. And the second component that is relevant is this issue of, I suppose, personal responsibility. My overall reading of the nutrition side of things is that really the message has not changed over the years. and that is that you enhance your chances of remaining fit and well and maximising your health if you have a broadly balanced diet. If you're having some fruit and some veggies, if you're reducing the total amount of fat in your diet, if you're taking the dog for a walk, if you're doing all of those healthy things. Now, where all of the special, miraculous diets come in is that they provide a quick, simple, easy answer. And that whether it's the CSIRO that is putting together the package, or it is the latest diet that's written in Woman's Day or Woman's Weekly, or the underlying message is usually the same, and that is you follow our piece of advice and you're going to maximise your health. And it helps people to not go to the Vic market, make some choices for themselves, takes that decision making out of their hands. Many of my patients talk to me about the nutritional stuff, and I always say the same thing. I say, don't get caught up with any of the fad diets. Go to the Vic market, buy some fresh veggies, go home and make yourself a stir fry, enjoy life. Yes, perhaps, maybe we will subsequently find that if you make some minor change in the type of veggies, you may live an extra 3 months when you're 90, but get over it.
Stephen David Henry, can I take you up on the question of what you would really like to see happen with complementary and alternative treatments, and what is achievable within the sort of political framework that we exist? Let me state my position and my potential conflict of interest. I work closely with a colleague, Tony Smith, who's chair of the Complementary Medicines Advisory Committee, has been for some time, and is involved in the coordination of these activities between Australia and New Zealand. Tony and I, at various times, have been heavily involved in regulation of conventional drugs and also the subsidisation of conventional drugs. I think I'm getting Tony's view accurately when he says that we cannot go back to the counterfactual of there are no complementary therapies, there's no big commercial market, let's plan the regulation. We can't go back there. We're at point B, we can't go back to A, we have to go to a new point C. And his view is we have to do that incrementally in the real world, which is first of all to tighten up the safety issues and leave efficacy aside for the moment, deal with the outstanding safety issues, and then move progressively, because that's the real world, that there hasn't been regulation. And if you think it's bad here, I've got to say I think regulation of these alternative treatments is a lot worse in other countries. So can you come back then, and maybe other members of the audience, and suggest, well, what is feasible, what could be achieved politically and economically?
I guess, again, my primary response to that is something that I touched on during the talk, and that is that I just don't think that we can stand by and continue to allow many of the companies and individuals who are profiting from these products to hang their coattails on science when it comes to advertising their products. They're more than happy to tell us that it's evidence-based, that it's clinically proven, that it's anti-aging, that it's more than happy to do that when they are lining their pockets. But if we were to say to them, okay, you've got that evidence, we're now going to bring you under the same sort of umbrella. We want you to present that evidence to the Pharmaceutical Benefits Advisory Committee and let them make a decision as to the worthwhileness or not. That's one of the things that I have difficulty with. I appreciate that it's difficult, if not impossible, to somehow go back and test every single compound. but I do still feel uncomfortable with what seems to me to be that double standard. Even if they looked at some of the advertising regulations and that they tightened up some of that, even if they looked at altering some of the information that was available, if they looked at a different, maybe a different level of evidence, or because I've also always said, I know that you can never draw the line at a point at which substances are going to be 100% safe. We have to have a certain amount, we have to accept a certain amount of risk. I don't care where we draw the line. If we all agree that we're going to test products to this certain point, I'm happy to draw that line, but I still do not understand why products that are clearly associated with very specific therapeutic claims, why we don't demand of them that they provide some evidence that they can do so. You know, a company with a new sleeping tablet would have to establish that it helps people to sleep. But if a drug company wants to market valerian or another herb and says it's going to help people to sleep, we don't require any sort of evidence. And there are, I mean, particularly with regards to, say, herbal preparations, there are an increasing number of reports appearing in the mainstream medical literature of harm being done by herbal products. Now, again, I'm happy to accept that risk if we can demonstrate that there is also a clear benefit.
Hi, Stephen. Yes, I have the mic up here. My name is Mark. Thank you for your talk. I've really enjoyed it. Maybe this may address some of the questions there. I don't know if I'm in the wrong area, but my question is your comment on if the therapeutic goods aren't made to go along with the I don't know how you say, the Pharmacology Advisory Committee, to prove their claims. My question is, do you think it would be possible for them to conform with the Fair Trading Act? You see, the Victorian, I know this from another research I did, the Victorian Fair Trading Act, Section 106A, and I'm not quoting directly because this is from memory, but Section 106A of the Fair Trading Act says that any supplier of any goods or service may, blah, 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 be required to prove the claims of that service or goods to the satisfaction of blah, 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 blah. And if not, may suffer penalties. Now, I don't know if the medical stuff comes under that, and I'm not a lawyer and I don't know the details, but it would seem on a very overview point that Section 106A of the Fair Trading Act says specifically goods and services, and obviously a sleeping tablet, that's a naturopathic sleeping tablet, is a good and has to be able to prove that claim. So maybe if the other people can't push it, maybe it could go through the Fair Trading Act. For example, if every person in this room, we independently went and bought sleeping tablets of that type on a certain day, like we had an email around Australia, and then we all wrote letters the next day saying it didn't work to the Fair Trading Act, maybe that could force an issue. What's your comment, Steve?
Look, certainly those avenues are available. The basic legal avenue is still available. That at some point somebody may well sue a natural practitioner or may sue a company that has produced a product, and that under common law they may want to establish, the case may boil down to whether or not you were making claims that your product was never going to fulfil. One of the issues is that the advertising of many of these goods, there's a difference in fact between what's allowed in terms of advertisements to the general public and what can be advertised to other practitioners. And so the very specific health, or the more specific health claims, are generally not made in the sort of leaflets that you will pick up in the health food store or the chemist. They're actually made in the material that is distributed to practitioners. So much of the stuff that's out there for the public to digest is in fact full of the very wishy-washy, may help to relieve the symptoms of so-and-so. They're very careful about not making very specific claims. There was a product that we saw, my wife and I saw in Priceline not long ago, which was essentially like a Band-Aid with a tiny little magnet and then little in the middle of it. And written on the outside of the packet was believed to assist in immune function. No comment as to who believed that it may assist. Didn't even have the old-fashioned may help to, but believed to. So, yeah, you know, at a minimum, one of the things that we really need to do is overhaul at least the advertising code and get a little bit more, some more stricter guidelines in that regard. But yeah, you know, going through fair trading, trade practices, even going through common law, they're all possibilities.
Ian Robinson, Stephen. Another possible suggestion is to go through the cigarette approach, which is you put a warning on everything that has therapeutic claims, something like warning, this product is not scientifically proven, which everybody has to put on unless they go and get the product proven by the therapeutic goods, through the therapeutic goods process, which then puts the onus on them. You know, you have this base position, warning not scientifically proven, unless they go through the scientific proof process. And you just make that a blanket requirement for anything.
And I, I'm not quite sure of the term, but perhaps ethically, I would have no particular problem with that sort of approach. That if we modified things in such a way that there was honest information available, I have no problem in principle with saying to someone, here is a treatment that is available. We don't have any existing evidence at the moment that it's going to do any good. There's a possibility that it may do some harm, and that we give the person the opportunity. That's true informed choice. But at the moment, that's not the system that we have. It's like with the vitamin and mineral supplements. Yes, right down in small letters down the bottom is only of use if diet is inadequate. But you'll notice that the companies that produce these things, they're not also producing leaflets which are saying, is your diet inadequate? And if your diet is inadequate, perhaps the best way of dealing with that is to go to the Victoria market instead of heading to the health food shop to buy a bottle of pills. So, yeah, you know, if there was more accurate information that said there's nothing to this and somebody is still happy to take it, yeah, I have less problems with that sort of a system.
Second last question. Yes, Rob Morrison. This is slightly peripheral to your topic, but I think very much its soulmate. I've been concerned for many years as a lecturer in human biology about not just the pharmaceuticals, but the practices that are permitted in the same kind of way. We have reflexology, we have iridology, we have a whole raft of these things, a number of which I understand you can get money back from the government when you go and consult practitioners. It would seem to me in a country where we're really struggling for money for things like MRI machines and dental care for the aged, that we allow these non-evidence-based practices to continue and to be subsidised through medical benefits.
One of the interesting issues about that is that to properly deal with that, you need to introduce a structure that the danger is that you will confer credibility. And so what I mean by that is that the best way to regulate practitioners is to have a body like, say, the Medical Board of Victoria that is responsible for overseeing issues of education and issues of complaints, whether or not the person is practicing to an efficient sort of standard. So on the one hand, we may be able to get closer to achieving that by allowing more recognition of some of the alternative practitioners and creating professional bodies that could oversee them. But of course the danger is that in doing that, you may then in the public's eye be conferring credibility upon that. At the moment, probably the only way that that's ever going to be dealt with is again through the legal sort of means, that it will take somebody going to a kinesiologist and having their cancer treated to then go through the court system and say, you have harmed me, and to then ask the court system to look at the evidence pro and con and to get a legal judgment which says, no, there is absolutely no validity in this. But that's the only way at the moment I can see that that could be achieved.
Last question.
Oh, look, I wonder if you would mind if I addressed a comment to the previous speaker, please.
Not at all.
David, look, I really enjoyed your talk, and I liked the bogus disorder and description of it, but I would like to see a discussion like that qualified with the recognition of the fact that severe clinical depression can have a big impact on people, and it comes over as somewhat similar to the diagnosis you described, I think.
Thank you for making the point. The syndrome we described of motivational deficiency disorder is actually quite distinct from major depressive disorder. We were quite careful, in fact, because the one acronym we considered for motivational deficiency disorder is MDD, which is the acronym that's typically used for major depressive disorder. So we were quite careful about that. There is actually a condition called amotivational syndrome, which occurs in people who've been heavy users of marijuana. The other point, though, I take from your question as also important is that for a number of the conditions that are the subject of disease-mongering campaigns, which are commercially driven, remember, we've been careful to point out in criticising these that there are a number of people within each of these categories that suffer genuinely from these disorders, and we've been at great pains, I think, to point out that it's a spectrum and that there are people who everybody agrees merit serious research and treatment and effective drugs.
Thank you to both the speakers, and thank you, Stephen.